The man from the studio had a check already written. It was March of 1955, and the backlot at Iverson Ranch in Chatsworth, California smelled of horse sweat and burned powder and red dust that worked into everything a man owned. A studio business office man named Clifford Pierce stood at the tailgate of a production truck with a manila envelope, and across from him stood a woman named Nora Gibbs in a gray wool coat too warm for the day. She had driven 40 minutes from Van Nuys. She was holding the envelope without opening it. A grip named Santos had set down his cable and was looking at his boots. 2 wranglers near the horse pen had gone still. At the far end of the truck, a large man in a work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearms stood with a coffee cup and was not drinking from it. Here is the story. The backlot at Iverson Ranch was the kind of place that looked like the West and smelled like work. The sandstone outcroppings in the hills behind it had been in more westerns than most actors, and the red dust that came off them settled on everything. On the cables coiled by the truck, on the coffee in the paper cups, on the collars of men who had been there since 6 in the morning, doing the kind of work that nobody watched, but that every scene depended on. It was a Tuesday, and the principal cast wasn't due until 10. The crew had the lot to themselves for a while yet, and the morning had the particular quiet of a place where people are doing difficult things without ceremony. Roy Gibbs had been doing stunt work in Hollywood for 16 years by the time he died. He had started in 1939 at 23, the way most men started. Someone knew someone, and there was a horsefall needed on a western. And Roy had grown up on horses outside Bakersfield, and he didn't say no to things. He was not a large man, and he was not a reckless one. He was precise. He had the kind of body control that takes years to develop and that directors came to rely on without fully understanding what they were relying on, which is a thing that happens in that business more than it should. By 1945, Roy Gibbs was one of the most dependable stunt doubles in Western pictures. He had doubled for 11 different actors across 43 films. He had taken falls from horses at full gallop, driven wagons off canyon roads, gone through 2 windows made of real glass before the industry moved to the sugar kind, and been set on fire in a controlled burn for a cavalry picture in 1948 that the studio was never entirely certain had been as controlled as they had specified. He had a cut above his left eye from a stagecoach sequence in 1951 that never healed flush, and a right knee that predicted rain with an accuracy his wife had come to treat as a household utility. He had doubled for John Wayne 6 times between 1949 and 1954. 6 films, 6 sets of falls and drags, and 1 water sequence in the Colorado River that nearly went wrong in a way that would have been nobody's fault, and everybody's. Wayne knew his name. More than that, Wayne knew his work, the way one craftsman knows another's, by the result, by the care in it, by the things that didn't go wrong because of decisions made before anyone was watching. Roy Gibbs died on a location outside Tucson in November of 1954. A horse came down wrong on a downhill run, the kind of fall that happens once in 1,000 takes, and that Roy had done everything correctly to prevent. He was 40 years old. He had been in the business for 16 years. He left Nora and 3 children, a daughter of 11 and 2 sons, 8 and 5. The production that employed Roy Gibbs at the time of his death was a company picture that had completed principal photography 4 days before the accident. The terms of Roy's employment were governed by a flat daily rate and a stunt adjustment clause that, in the interpretation of the studio business office, did not apply to a stunt performed on an overage day. Clifford Pierce had explained this on the telephone in the same low professional voice he used for everything, and Nora had listened until he finished. She had asked him to say the number. He had said the number. She had said she would be there at 9. The number in the envelope was $640. It represented Roy's daily rate across the contracted shoot days. It did not include the stunt adjustments for the 17 specialty sequences Roy had performed across the production, which under the standard interpretation of his agreement would have come to an additional $910. Clifford Pierce had a legal rationale for the difference, and it was, within the narrowest reading of the contract, defensible. It was also wrong in a way that Clifford Pierce knew and was counting on Nora not to know. She opened the envelope standing at that tailgate, and she looked at the check for a moment, and then she looked at Clifford Pierce. She did not say anything. She folded the check once, carefully, along the crease it already had, the way a person folds something when they are deciding whether they have the fight left in them and have arrived at the answer. Santos had not picked his cable back up. The two wranglers had not moved. A woman from the script department was standing near the makeup trailer with her clipboard held against her chest and was not writing anything on it. If you have ever known someone who swallowed a wrong because they were too tired and too alone to push back on it, drop a comment below. This one is for them. The coffee cup came down on the tailgate. Not hard, just set down with a particular kind of finality. The way a man sets something down when he has heard enough and the next thing he does will not be drinking coffee. He was a large man, and he moved without hurry, which made the movement more definitive rather than less. Across the distance between where he had been standing and where Clifford Pierce was standing. And he came to a stop close enough that Pierce had to look up at him. He held out his hand toward Nora, not looking at her yet. She understood what he was asking for. She put the folded check in his hand. He unfolded it. He looked at the number. He looked at Pierce. He said, "What's the adjustment total?" Pierce said he wasn't sure this was the stunt adjustments. The total. Pierce said $910 in a voice that had lost some of its professional evenness. The man folded the check again and held it out to Pierce. He said, "Write a new one." Pierce began to explain the contractual basis for Roy Gibbs went into the Colorado River for me in 1952. His voice had gone quiet, not angry, just quiet, the way a fact is quiet. He took a fall in Tucson in November that was in my contract, not his. The adjustment total is $910. Write a new check. Pierce looked at him. He looked at the check in his own hand. He looked at the crew that had accumulated, without anyone intending to accumulate, in the general vicinity of the production truck. He took out his pen. He wrote the number on the back of the original check, initialed it, and handed it to the man, who handed it to Nora Gibbs without looking at Pierce again. Nora looked at the new number. Her face did not change in any visible way. Her hand, the one holding the check, was very still. She said, "I don't." He had already turned partially away. Roy was good at his job, he said. Not to Pierce, not quite to Nora. Just said it. The way a man states a fact that shouldn't need stating. That's what this is. He picked up his coffee cup from the tailgate and walked back toward the set. The backlot returned to its work. Santos picked up his cable. The Wranglers moved. Clifford Pierce drove back to the studio. He did not speak to anyone about what had happened, and nobody who was there spoke to him about it either, which was its own kind of verdict. Nora Gibbs drove back to Van Nuys with a check for $1,550 and her hand steady on the wheel. She used $480 of it to pay 3 months of back rent on the house in Van Nuys. She used $600 to settle a medical account from Roy's last hospitalization that she had been deferring since December. She put the remaining $470 in an account at a savings and loan on Oxnard Street that she had opened the week after Roy died, and she added to it every month for the next 11 years on a teacher's aide salary from an elementary school in Sherman Oaks. By 1966, the account had $3,100 in it, which was enough for her oldest son, Danny, to start at Los Angeles City College without taking on debt. Danny Gibbs did not become a stuntman. He studied engineering, graduated in 1968, and spent 31 years designing safety systems for industrial equipment, the kind of systems that are built to prevent, in factories and on construction sites, the category of accident that had taken his father on a hillside outside Tucson. He retired in 1999. He never spoke much about why he had chosen that particular work. When people asked, he would say it was interesting, which was true as far as it went. Her younger son, Pete, did become a stuntman. He started in 1971 at the age of 22, the same age his father had started, and he worked steadily in Western pictures and action films for 19 years. He was precise, the way his father had been precise. He had the same body control and the same refusal to cut corners on the preparation that made the difference between a fall that looked right and a fall that went wrong. He retired from stunt work in 1990 with both knees intact and a credit list of 68 films. He taught stunt coordination at a film workshop in Burbank for 12 years after that, and told the young men and women who came through it the same thing at the start of every session: the work is only worth doing if you do it exactly right. He never said where that came from. Some things, once learned, don't need explaining. Nora Gibbs's youngest daughter, Carol, has a photograph on the wall of her house in Simi Valley. It is a production still from one of Roy's films, taken on location. Roy in full Western costume standing beside a horse with his hat pushed back and his eyes squinted against the sun. It is in a plain wooden frame that Nora bought at a five and dime store in Van Nuys sometime in the late 1950s. Carol had it reframed in 1993 when the original came apart, and she chose a frame that looked as close to the original as she could find. The photograph itself is still the same one. The morning light comes through Carol's front window in a certain season and lands on that frame for about half an hour before it moves on, and the photograph stays. John Wayne never told anyone, not the director on that picture, not his own business manager, not in any interview conducted in the 40 years he worked after that March morning at Iverson Ranch. Nobody on that backlot talked about it publicly, and he certainly didn't. The check existed. The corrected number existed. What happened between those two facts was not a story he offered to anyone. There are men who understand, in a way that does not require discussion, what is owed. Not legally. Not on paper. In the other kind of accounting, the one that runs between men who do dangerous work together and trust each other with their lives and don't ask for applause about it. Roy Gibbs had gone into a river and taken a fall because the job required it, and because that was the kind of man he was. His widow drove 40 minutes in a wool coat on a warm morning because she needed what was right. One man in that lot understood the full weight of both of those things. He finished his coffee and went back to work. If this story found you, pass it on to someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There are more stories like this one, and every one of them deserves to be told. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.